It's time for Tartarian Tales number 30, and this is back to Pinto, where he is going to take a trip to a chapter called The Wayside Shelter, which has some interesting insight into the poorest and just the culture back at this time, and how kind of the spiritual aspect of them at the time period, and a lot more. It's just another very interesting, small, but very cool chapter from Pinto, and it's Tartarian Tales 30, so here we go. Let's get right into it today for just a little quickie. The Wayside Shelter. It must have been dark for about an hour when we reached the town where the shelter was located, in what turned out to be a little village. We headed straightway for it, and when we came inside, we received a warm welcome from the four men in charge, who were very charitably put us up for the night. Early the next morning, they asked us who we were or what had happened to bring us to such a plight. We told them that we were foreigners, natives of the kingdom of Siam, and that 2 weeks before, while bound from the port of Ningpo to the fishing waters of Nanking, we had been shipwrecked in a bad storm at sea, out of which nothing had been saved but those wretched carcasses of ours, as bare and battered as we stood before them. Then they asked us what we intended to do or where we wanted to go. To the city of Nanking, we replied, where we would be able to ship out as oarsmen aboard the Lanteus, bound for Canton or Comhe, where our fellow countrymen carried on their trade, with the permission of the Ai Tao of Peking, in the protection afforded them by the word of the Son of Heaven, crowned lion on the throne of the world. And that was why we were asking them, for the love of God, to please let us stay there until we recovered our strength and were well enough to make the journey on foot, and to give us some sort of clothing with which to cover ourselves. It is no more than right that we should grant your tearful request for garments to cover your nakedness, all four of them replied. But at the moment the house is so short of funds that, if we were to comply with your request, we would be unable to take care of all our other obligations. However, we would be very glad to do whatever we can for you. Then, naked as we were, they led us through the entire village, which might have had some 40 to 50 inhabitants, more or less, all of them, from what we could see, very poor, who earned a living by the sweat of their brows, and they collected alms for us that came to 2 towels in cash, half a sack of rice, a small amount of flour, some beans and onions, as well as some old clothes, which improved our situation a little bit. And they themselves added 2 silver taels to it, which they withdrew from the shelter's funds. But they would not allow us to stay, explaining that the rules of the house did not permit the poor to remain longer than 3 to 5 days, with the exception of the sick and pregnant women, who received special consideration because they were unable to walk without danger, and that under no circumstances could they break this rule, which had been established in ancient times by learned and religious men, but that 3 leagues from there, in a large town called Silejakau, there was a very wealthy hospice open to the poor of every kind, where we would be better cared for than in their shelter, which was as small and impoverished as the town itself, and that to help us they would give us a letter of recommendation signed by all those of their brotherhood that would ensure us an immediate reception. We expressed our deep thanks for this, telling them to let it be done in the name of God. At this, one of the four, an old man, exclaimed, "You may be sure that it is being done for that reason alone, and not for any worldly reason, because there is an enormous difference between the ways of God and the ways of the world, in both deeds and the conditions under which they come to pass. Since the world is a poor and miserable place, no good can be expected of it, whereas God is infinitely rich and a friend to the poor who, from the depths of their poverty, humbly and patiently sing his praises. The world is vindictive, and God is forbearing. The world is wicked, and God is all goodness. The world is voracious, and God is abstinent. The world is rebellious and resentful, and God is peace-loving and forbearing. The world is lying and deceitful with its own, and God is all truth and light, and sweet and gentle with those who turn to him in prayer. The world is sensual and avaricious, and God is generous and purer than the light of the sun and all the stars that we can see, as well as those far more excellent stars which are not given to us to see, but which are always there in full view of his radiant countenance. The world is torn by conflicting opinions, puffed up with false, vainglorious airs, and God is pure and constant in his truth, by means of which the humble and pure of heart shall find eternal glory. The world is full of folly and ignorance, and God is pure knowledge of all truth. And therefore, my friends, though you may find yourselves in wretched straits today, Do not despair of the promises he holds forth, for I can assure you that if you, for your part, are not unworthy of him, he, for his part, will not fail you, because he has never failed his own, though there are some blind people in the world who hold to the contrary because they are constantly oppressed by wretched poverty and despised by the world. Then he handed us the letter of recommendation for the hospice, and we took it and departed. By then it was close to midday, and when we got to the town it was about an hour or two before sunset. We went directly to the rest house of the poor, as the Chinese call it, though I use the word hospice here in order to be understood, because that is what we usually call it. In the moment we handed the letter we were carrying to the Tanagores of the Brotherhood, we were all sitting at a table, attending to the affairs of the poor. They accepted it with an unusual ceremony of respect and passed it to the clerk to be read out loud. He rose to his feet, and turning to all those seated at the table in a sing-song voice, he read the letter, which was phrased as follows. We, the poorest among the poor, unworthy servants of the Lord, whose glorious deeds the stars in heaven bear silent witness to in the dark of night, duly elected to succeed to our posts here in the Lord's house of Buatando, situated in this village of Catahore, do hereby reverently and respectfully beseech your humble persons as dedicated servants of the Lord to extend the hand of charity to these 14 foreigners by sheltering them and assisting them in any way possible, 3 of whom are dark-skinned men and the other 11 of a lighter color, whose bare flesh and dire poverty will convince you at a glance that we have done the right thing by requesting this favor for them, since they and all their possessions were cast away by the impetuous waters of the sea, which, with their customary fury, executed a sentence imposed by his mighty hand, for he frequently allows disasters to occur as punishments of his righteous justice, that show clearly how much his judgment is to be feared, from which may he deliver us all on the day we die, so that we may not see the awesome indignation of his countenance. Once this letter had been read, they arranged for us to be lodged in a spotlessly clean building where 14 cots had been properly set up, along with a table and plenty of chairs where they served us a delicious meal. And early the next morning, the clerk, acting on orders from his superiors, asked us who we were, what country we came from, where we had been shipwrecked, and other questions of that sort, which we answered exactly the same way as we had in the other town, so that they would not catch us in a lie. Then he asked us what we intended to do, and we told him that we would like to stay there long enough to regain our health, if they would allow us to, because we were quite ill and unable to walk. He answered, by all means, for that was their main function, which they carried out constantly in the service of God, for which we all thanked him, weeping and putting on such a good show to suit our purposes, that the tears rose to his eyes. And he immediately sent for a doctor, instructing him to take good care of us, because we were so poor that all we possessed in the world was what the house could give us. Then he recorded our names in a book, which we all signed, a formality he said was necessary in order for them to keep track of what they spent on us. So, some very interesting insight into basically a homeless shelter from that time period. And I found it interesting that, they keep the pregnant women and the sick, but they had to let the others go, and had like a 3-day thing, and that was designed from the ancient times. And then the other way that one of the guys talks about God and, how the troubles and things is actually very relevant to now, how God is truth and light, but although this world kind of isn't. It's like this evil has existed, this one that exists today still, has been a part of this universe for a long time, and God is the good, and separated those two things, the battle, the duality that occurs and seems to be timeless. And I still actually am beginning to believe that I really firmly feel that there was once a time of harmony upon earth, and where this evil did not really occur, and just people were just inherently good. And maybe when people rose to power, they didn't just succumb to the evil and the temptations that they had an ancient religion that kind of bound everything and really taught everything and instilled everything and had immediate rewards, spiritual rewards for being good that were just kind of right there and easy to grasp if you were fully believing in this reality. And we've just been lost through the times. Distractions, propaganda, greed, power, money, all these different things that just distract from what the purity of the world truly is and truly could be and should become. And so I guess I had to. Once I read that paragraph with the God talk, I just felt like I had to include it, because it really is truth and light are represented by the good. The power of good has truth on its side and light. And darkness is a totally different ballgame, and they're all necessary for our modern world. But it's time for the evil and the darkness to end. And it's time for us to really get back to what is normal and regulate this place and balance it in harmony with everybody. And the culture is a main part of that. We have to go down a path that is good for Earth, because the one we're on now is just bad. And you can pray all you want and all this stuff, but things are going to happen. We need to take action. And I do believe that we have divine powers on our side, but they're only acted when we do works of good, and they only are effective when we do good things and good deeds, and we are good. Karma unleashes upon us when we do the other things, although it doesn't seem to unleash too badly on these other people, but hopefully that time has come. We need a time of peace, tranquility, and greatness on Earth, just as these ancients did, just as they already had. It seems like everyone throughout time knows and wants to live in a peaceful world and raise happy families. No one wants this evil. No one wants the hate, the division, the nonsense. We all want to live. Bless you all.